they get, and I get at least one or two a week. Good questions, not not derogatory. I don't have anybody that's called me really derogatory or trying to be ugly.
Good.
Everybody I get that calls me it's hard to argue with the truth. You know what I'm saying? It's just staring in the face, and it's hard to argue with it. Although people do want to validate the thing that they have been established in that they call the truth. I mean, I would do the same thing. I would have argued with me 25, 30 years ago. It would have been a really good argument. I would have. But again, when you're open-minded, or if you do open your mind and you begin to think out of that perimeter or box that we have been locked into, then the truth gets clearer and clearer and clearer. Anyway, I was talking to this person, and I said, I have had something that has really impressed upon me about the experiences that we have in life. And one of the experiences is the experience that transforms me. And that in that experience, I begin to realize where I begin to fall asleep. And that's what happens to all of us in this journey. And I just told him, I said, here's exactly what it is. The scripture even uses this phrase, to be born again. And I said, when we were in the womb of our mother, intelligence that we call God, that's what we call it, is what put us together and made us. It was not the intelligence of the woman that carried us in her womb. It had nothing to do with that. Because women who have spent years and years educating themselves and are virtually intelligent, as opposed to a woman who's not ever been to school, can both have a baby. So it's not the intelligence of the person that builds the child in the womb, it's God. And so, that's really, it's hard to argue with that fact. It's God that builds that. And I use the analogy, it's God that builds his tabernacle and his temple, his house, his dwelling place in the womb of a woman without the sound of a hammer and without the sound of a saw. Now that used to confuse me when I read that passage of scripture in the Old Testament, that God was building his tabernacle without the sound of a hammer and without the sound of a saw. And I was thinking, well, how does he put the boards together, and how does he put the boards to fit if he don't have a hammer and saw, where he's got them somehow or other silenced?
They built it out of rock, Lynn. That was what I was told when I questioned that. They built it out of stone.
Built the thing out of rock. And so when I finally, my lightning-fast mind got the revelation, it's the one built in the womb of the woman, because you can't hear it being built in there. And you can put your ear sometimes, and maybe later on, and hear the heartbeat of the...
You can feel it.
And you can feel it, yeah, you can feel it. But as far as hearing how an eyeball is built, or a lung, or a heart, or a liver, or a leg grown, you can't, but it happens. Well, that's the intelligence of God. Well, the intelligence built it, and just like the first passage of scripture that I want to use, if you want to go ahead and open up over there, in Genesis chapter 1, that's actually where I wanted to start, was Genesis chapter 1. Of course. Where else can you go? Build my house on the rock. Well, let's go to the rock. I mean, to argue with this passage of scripture, Genesis 1, 25, 26, Genesis 1, 26 and 7, it says, and God said, let us make man, and that word man is Adam, or Adam, which actually is humankind, so it incorporates male and female. And really, I used to have people argue that with me, and I said, well, then just look over Genesis chapter 5 real quickly, in verse 1, 2, and 3, and it says, this is the book of the generations of Adam, in the day God created man. And that word man is the same word Adam. In the likeness of God made he him, male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam. Called their name. Them who? him and her. Called him and her Adam in the day when they were created. Now that's hard to argue with right there. So what was his and her name? It was Adam. But it had nothing to do with the male and the female body. It had to do with the right and left hemisphere of the brain, which everybody has male and female hemispheres of the brain. And it was in that likeness we were created, just like it says in Genesis 1:26, made man in it as its image. So we're made as the image of God, not in it, as it. So as God is, we are. And that's hard for us to think, because we think, I'm just a human, I'm just a man or woman. And we sing that song about how lowly and slow or low I am. When in truth, we're not. We're a God manifest being. We do, many times we do dumb, stupid things. I do anyway. I talk about me. I do things that's human. They're very human.
I posted a thing on Facebook that was saying eating Twinkies with God. And it showed a little boy getting into the refrigerator, and he gets out a couple of Twinkies and some orange juice or something, and he heads out the door. His mom says, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to eat Twinkies with God." And she said, "We'll be back by 6:30 because supper will be ready." So it showed him going out looking, and he sits down beside this woman that's sitting there, and she looks really distressed, and he takes out his Twinkie and starts to eat it. Well, he offers it to her. And they sat there and just talk and everything. He offers her the orange juice and all this. Well, he says, "Well, it's about time. I got to go back." And so he heads back home, and she said, "Well, did you find God?" And he said, "Yes, God's not a man. God is a woman." And all that. And then it shows her going to her homeless friend and said, "What are you smiling so big for?" She said, I ate a Twinkie with God, and God is younger than I thought."
That's cute.
That it was.
That's
really
cute.
good.
So, back to the story, I was talking to this lady, and I said, the same coming out of the womb through the normal birth canal, normal process, is literally a death. Because you're in here in a place that you are not familiar with outside, but you're familiar with that in here. And that's where you're built, you're formed. And in that building, in that formation, you're like God. Well, you come out of that, and that is a death process. And in that death process, when you get into this physical dimension, this physical world, we slowly go to sleep living in this dimension. And by that, I mean we go to sleep to our God state. So when you sing in that song, you sing that song like, I went to sleep, and that's what happens. That's what happens to all of us, everybody. And to wake up and to come back into the state of being that I was created to be is a reverse process. And that's why the scripture uses you must be born again. In other words, it is a dying to go back into the divinity that you are made of.
Well, then that's the first verse of Rocky Mountain High when John Denver says,
Yeah.
The summer of his 27th year, he went back to a place he had never been before.
And that's exactly what it feels like.
That's what we
And
do.
so all of us struggle with that. That's all I'm trying to say. It is a struggle to go back to be who you are until you get to a place that you realize I can be who I am. But it's still a struggle to get back there. And I don't care who you are. And living life helps us in that struggle to get back to a place where that you finally begin to realize who you are. And so I wrote some notes here, some things that was still mulling over in my consciousness as I pulled up there outside. And here's what I was writing. I wrote, spiritual truth is always, always to show you. It's never to show you how they are. Spiritual truth is never about them. It's always about you. It's about me. It's always very personal. So that's where religion and spiritual truth part companies. Religion will always point to you and them to tell you how sorry you are, or how this or that or the other. But spiritual truth will always point you to you. It'll always have you looking in the mirror of you, because that's the one you're looking for that. I say this a lot. I come to realize quite a number of years ago, 25, 30 years ago, that it wasn't given to me to fix anybody. But prior to that, as a young preacher, I thought that was my job, bless God. I'm going to fix everybody, because they're all going to hell, and I'm not. I'm saved, I'm glorified, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost, and told a 10-pound date Bible. So I got all the right to fix all y'all, because y'all need help. I don't got help. And that was the attitude, and sorry to say, and sad to say, that's the attitude of most preachers. And if they could ever come to realize it is not their job to get anybody fixed or saved, but yet they're trained and they're taught and they're drilled that that is their job. They'll use Matthew 28 and they'll use Mark 16. Mark 16, part they use is not even in the original Bible. It's an addition. Matthew 28 is a total gross error of the translation. It doesn't say to go into all the world and preach the gospel to everybody that's lost and dying and going to hell and get them saved and make them a disciple. It doesn't say that. It does say to train and to teach. That's all it does. It says train and teach. So, another note I wrote, the so-called Bible is a book. So I use that word, so-called Bible. That's what y'all all call it, right? That's what I call it. That's what we've all been taught to call it. Matter of fact, I think it even says it on it somewhere, don't it?
Most of them say Holy Bible.
There it is. I had to open mine. It's on the second page. Dates annotated. Reference Bible. The Holy Bible. Well, first off, it ain't holy. And the word Bible, biblios, just simply means little book. And so the so-called Bible is a book or a text about the mysteries of human beings. In other words, man or Adam, as I just explained from Genesis 1 and Genesis 5, which actually comes, and I'm going to talk about this morning some more, about Israel, Hebrew, and try to get a clear understanding, because all of the stories and all of the allegories and all of the myths in the whole Bible are about you. They're about me. They're stories about me using mythical characters. Me in my down setting and in my uprising. In other words, me in my low time and me in my high time. And I don't care who you are, you will feel that. I was telling a fellow this week, I said, if we could learn to follow and read the moon, because the moon kind of dictates many times our attitude, because we are 95% water and the moon is emotional, it affects water, so it affects me. And you can ask any police officer, you can go to any hospital, and especially go to the birthing ward and ask them if the moon affects anybody. And do you know what they'll all tell you? 100% of them will tell you. Yes, people go crazier when the moon is full, and more babies are born when the moon is full. Why? It is psychological and emotional, and it affects all of us, period. So if you're having a time when your emotions are going, wow, crazy one way or another, if you just learn to realize it's the moon, it really ain't me, it's the moon. So you don't blame it on somebody, you can blame it on the moon. But once we realize and we recognize and know how to read it, then I can find my own balance in it and realize it's just me. I'm just having a moment, and it'll pass. Always does.
Maybe people will stop saying the devil made me do it and say the moon made me do it.
There you go. That would probably be a better, accurate phrase. The moon. It's the moon's fault. Anyway, Hebrew. That's what we're going to talk about. We call this the Hebrew Bible, don't we? And I think a lot of people have been taught, or they learned to call it the Hebrew Bible, which I want to deal with that a little bit and try to give you a different picture of that, of it being the Hebrew Bible. But whatever you want to call it, Holy Bible, Hebrew Bible, I want to go back into ancient Hebrew. And ancient Hebrew, when you really find out that Ancient Hebrew comes out of, let me just read you a passage over here in the New Testament, in the book of Acts. Let's see if I can find it real quickly. And I know you've all been told this differently. Moses, have you all been told and have heard that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible called the Pentateuch? Right?
That's what we're told, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. That's what we were told. Well, Moses is a mythological character, Moshe. And you can even look at the glyphs of his name, the Hebrew glyphs. I had a lady ask me, what is a glyph? I said a glyph is a holy character. Each one of the characters in the Hebrew alphabet are glyphs. And so when I say glyph, I just do that unconsciously because I'm referring to the characters. 22 characters in the original language with 5 additionals called finals added to it to give it a total of 27. So when I'm saying glyph, I'm referring to one of those 22 or 27 characters. Listen to this. It says, and I'm reading from Acts chapter 7, verse 20, it says, in which time Moses was born and was exceeding fair and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. When he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son, and Moses was learned in all of the wisdom of Egypt. So where did Moses, being learned and skilled and trained in all of Egyptian wisdom and instructions, where did he get his knowledge? It was all Egyptian. I mean, that should not be hard. So when he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, what did he base his writing on? Let's say he's a character, really. He wrote it on Egypt mythology, Egyptian stories, the Egyptian hieroglyphs. That's why there's such a phenomenal semblance between the Egyptian mythologies and the stories told in the Bible. I mean, they're just wove together. So it says, Moses was learned in all of the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in words and deeds. Mighty in words, that means he had a command of speech. He didn't stutter. You were all told he stuttered, so Aaron had to speak for him. This is right out of your Bible, your Biblios, okay? So where did Moses get it? I want to give you this bit of wisdom and knowledge. He got it from Egyptian mythology, and Egyptian mythology, number one, did not even have a word for God. There was no word for God. The word God is relatively new. Did y'all know that? Most people don't know that. You can go back 400, 500, 600 years ago, and there wasn't a word God. That word God got put into script here. If I was reading this from Hebrew, I would not read the word God. I would read the word Elohim, and when I read the word Elohim, I would realize that it was referring to the gods. Understanding that Moses wrote it, what would be Moses' mindset of the gods? It would be this. It would be the Egyptian N-T-R, and those were glyphs, non-tov rash. And if I understood the glyphs, non-tov rash, and I put abbreviation in it, N-E-T-E-R, that's what I'd call it, netter. So in Hebrew, or in Egyptian, the netter, you have this word netter, which in Latin, it becomes natura, natura, in Latin, and it meant nature. That's where we get our English word nature from, the same thing. So, where would you find the N-T-R, netter, which equals the gods? Where would you find them? You find them in nature. Everything in nature is constantly telling you that. So, if I go back into the Egyptian mythologies, I would draw a big circle, and then I would divide the circle, which represents 360 degrees. I would divide it in half, and I would call half of it male, and I would call half of it female. But yet it's 360 degrees. It's got 180 over here and 180 over here. And in Egyptian mythology, it would say I have 180 senses that are masculine, and I have 180 senses that are feminine. And we broke it down like this. And we made man, and voila, there's your stick man. With a division right down the middle of it. And I can go into talk about this and show you this. I hope y'all can see this. Because once you begin to realize it, you begin. So what is my work in life? When I come into the physical world, and then I begin to realize the physical world rocks me to sleep. And Paul alludes to that in 1 Corinthians 15, and they use several different words from Greek, but translated them wrong in English. And it's so clear that what happens, I get lulled to sleep. I know that seems, but I'm not asleep, I'm awake. I am asleep to that which I truly am. And I use the term asleep because if I wake up, I begin to realize who I really am. I'm God materialized in the physical world. I'm God now that's carrying 180 masculine senses and 180 feminine senses. And my work in life is to join the two and to break the middle wall of partition so that I, in my physical, natural world and my spiritual world, are one world. So that's the part of the journey. And going back up into the womb, symbolically, is as much a dying and difficult as it is to come out of the womb. Because to come out of it and to be born here is a life-death process. The child has to press through that cavity that's a death to it. And some do die doing it. And some can't. Some die in the canal. Do you understand that? So it's serious. Well, going back in is the same thing. I have to go back up into the womb of the Spirit so that I can reconnect to who I am. And it does require struggle. It does require discipline. It does require effort. Just exactly like the child did when he come out. Yeah, okay. So, the natura, the nature of the natura actually was the only word they had for the word God, because it didn't have a word for God. Neither did the Hebrews have a word for God. The word the Hebrews had was Elohim, or El. And the word El actually meant power, and the word Elohim actually meant the 12 astrological signs that create the physical body, that are encompassed in the Hebrew glyphs, or the Hebrew letters and characters. So, when we see that, as we see that, it begins to change and transform my world. So, I want to read you a note here that I wrote a couple of weeks ago. The stories in the Bible were written to show us how the spiritual, in other words, the unknown or the unseen powers and abilities, would and could manifest themselves as mankind. When and as we read the stories as a mirror of or to myself, in other words, I see myself as a Joshua, I see myself as a warrior, or I see myself as a David. In other words, I see myself as a king, or I see myself as an Adam and Eve, a creator. And I can just go on and on through the stories. I see myself in these stories, in these different characters. I can also see myself in negative characters, because there are characters in the stories that begin to show me the negative attributes of my physical nature, my physical body. So if I do that, I begin to see myself as these different characters. I'll begin to understand the stories and how they apply to me. How they apply to me physically, my body. How they apply to me mentally, psychologically, my mind, and most importantly, how they apply to me spiritually. But if all I do is look at them as a religion, I will never ever figure out or get what they're saying to me. I never will. You know why? I will always look at it as religion, because religion then concocts a belief, and a belief is a fence that you live in, a perimeter and a boundary that you bind yourself up in, and call it my beliefs. This is what I believe.
Something I just felt interesting, you mentioned you can look at David and think of yourself as a king, but the way that our mentality, our mental efforts are, you can also look at David and call yourself an adulterer and a murderer and think how lowly you are as well.
Hey,
But that's actually both sides of who we are.
that's the same man. That was the same man on the roof that saw that pretty naked girl. And by the way, if you look at that story and you'll try to do an analogy on time frames, you know, David didn't raise Solomon. Solomon was David's son. Did y'all know that? In the story. But David wasn't present. He was not a father present. David was busy on the battlefield killing people. That's right. David was called a man of war. He had blood on his hands because he was constantly killing people. And they would even say that when David comes in, David, you slain your thousands and your 10,000, you did. Because that was David's reputation. That's who he was. He was a man of war. He didn't raise Solomon, and Solomon was supposed to be called the most wisest man that's ever lived. But actually, David represents the side of me that's both masculine and feminine, both weak and strong. He does. And if we would look at the stories like that and realize that David is pointing to the sides of me that are weak or strong, that do this or do that. It's that way with all of the characters. They will show us. We look at things that we call mistakes. We look at things that we call failures, not to realize and not to really recognize they weren't mistakes, they weren't failures, they were learning curves. How many of you have ever experienced them? I do all the time. But if I'm not going to learn from it, if I'm not going to look at it and pay attention to it, guess what? I get to do it again. And do you know what? Sometimes it gets old doing it again. But we do. We do. Why? Because we get stuck in this we're asleep in this physical dimension, and that's not right or it's not wrong. That's just the way it is. So the stories, until we establish clearly that the ancient text, which we call the Scriptures, from the Latin scriptura, that's where it comes from, which just simply means writing, or it means sacred book. We are familiar with the ancient texts and were always written. They were always written. Did I say they were always written? I really meant to say they were always written to be symbols. Yeah. They were always written to be symbols, not history. That's difficult. Why? We have been so ingrained in the Bible is a history book. It is not a history book. It is a mystery book about how God lives in physical form.
Well, now, Lynn, it can't always be, because you know you was taught you take it literal except when you can't.
That's what he hammered that one at me, but no.
That's what they would say.
No, it is a mystery book. It is not a history book. I tell you, if we can ever learn that, you fall back in love with the writings of the Scripture and you begin to realize this is a book about me. If I really want to know how to get from A to Z, I will have to get to know me. That's poetry. That should be a song.
We'll figure out a way to put that in the book.
Because if I don't know me, I don't. You got to go back. All the ancient material, all the ancient temples weren't places to go and pay you tithe and to hear the preacher preach you're going to hell. They were all places of learning. They were places of higher training and teaching. The temples were schools. They were colleges. They were universities. They were places that you would go, and above the door of most all of them, the phrase was written, know yourself. Because that's the bottom line. It's not a matter of you knowing everybody else. If you don't know you, you don't know anything. It's about knowing you. So the allegories, they were always written as symbols, as allegories, as dramas, as stories. And if we continue to miss this fact, then we will continue to miss the mark, which is what they call sin. In other words, we constantly live in sin, according to their definition of sin. Their definition of sin is to miss the mark. And in that respect, it's true, because if we can't ever hit on who I really am and realize it's about me, that's not selfish, that's fact, it's about me. And if I get that, then I begin to realize it's me that I'm accountable to. It's not somebody else. So I want you to go with me now, if you will, to the book of Genesis chapter 14. And I want to show you something about the Bible, about most important things in the Bible. Genesis chapter 14. And I want to show you something, a word here, that is really it's really a beautiful word. Genesis 14 and 13, of course this is right after Abram. It hadn't been changed to Abraham yet, he's still Abram. He represents the male side of the cerebrum. He's the brum of the cerebrum. The sari is Sarah, the Abram is the brum. So the cerebrum, that's the medical terminology for your upper brain. That's who Abram and Sarah represent. Verse 13, it says, and there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew. That's the first place that you see this word Hebrew. Okay? And I want to show you what's happened to us over a period of years. This supposedly was written about 3,400 or 3,500 years ago, supposedly. It was written about that long, 3,400 or 3,500 years ago. Yet what happens is we have our ideologies in the concepts that have been twisted and given to us about 2,500 years ago. So there was probably a 1,000-year period of time between what was and what we think is. And what happened was religion was born during that period of time. Prior to the 2,500 or so, 2,800 years ago, religion was not a part of the mindset of people. Religion became a concoction of men, where that men could separate the priestcraft from the people and exalt the priestcraft to a place way above the people, a place the people can't get to. And that happened. And it even happened in this book. And I can show you how it happened and where it happened, where it even began to happen. But now, first off, let's just take this word, Abraham the Hebrew. Now, if you read it like that, you'd automatically think that Abraham somehow or another was of the Hebrew nationality or was of a Hebrew people, right?
Yes.
That's not at all. Let's go back 2 chapters. Go back to chapter 11. And let's just see who Abram was. Genesis chapter 11, this is the story of where the consummation of stories that you have from Genesis chapter 4 through chapter 11, where you have 3 sets of 3 sons. The story of Adam and so-called Eve with 3 sons. I said so-called. There's 3 sons mentioned. Then you have the story of Noah with 3 sons. Then you have the story of Terah with 3 sons, in which one of those boys is Abram. And that's where we pick up right here in verse 31 of chapter 11. And Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai, the daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldeans. So what was Terah and what was Abram? They were Chaldeans. Well, who were the Chaldeans? I wrote that down, but I think it's on my notes at home. The Chaldeans were basically known as the intellectuals. They were known as the highly learned and skilled. They were known as savants. Do you know what a savant is? Special person. People who have special skills and abilities. They're special. They're not demonic. They're special. They're savants. Have you ever heard of the astrologers? Astrologers were men or women, men and women, who understood the movement of the sun, the moon, the stars, planetary, all the universal movement of energies. They understood these energies and what these energies did. As a matter of fact, if you hold your place right there in Genesis chapter 11 and go real quickly over with me to the book of Matthew, I want to show you something here. Matthew chapter 2, about the introduction of the character that we know of as Jesus. And here it says in Matthew chapter 2, it says, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem," which Bethlehem was not even a city at this time, period. History can prove that. History will prove that. Does prove that. It was not a city. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men. That word wise men actually is called magi. Have you ever heard of the phrase magi?
Yep.
Who were the magi's? The magi's were Chaldeans. They were the astrologers. They understood it. Notice what it says right here. It says, Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that was born King of the Jews? We have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. Now that's the introduction to the story of Jesus. You have all seen that. You've all gone to the Christmas, what do you call that thing? Nativity thing. And those were the Chaldeans. In other words, you have to grasp what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is Abram, calling Abram a Hebrew, and to understand what the Eber was, the Hebrew word for Eber, to understand why it was calling him that, to realize it's referring to an aspect of your being, is what I'm trying to say. Because originally, Abram was like his father. He was from Chaldea. Ur of the Chaldees. Back over to Genesis chapter 11. It says, here's what it says. And Abram, and Terah took Abram, verse 31, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with him from Ur the Chaldee to go into and Le'ek Leon, that word in Hebrew, Le'ek Leon, to go into. That word does mean this. It means you go from without to within. It's talking about going from all that you see out here in a physical dimension that's deceiving you or pulling you or leading you to what it wants you to think, and you go within yourself. That's where the light is at. That's where the word is the Hebrew word or. It's used in Genesis chapter 1 for the word light. That's where it's at. It's inside you. When you need to know the answers to the questions that seem to be the mysteries unsolvable, it's inside you. You carry it with you. It's inside you. That's what it's telling him here. As Abram, you go within yourself. Now, verse 1 of chapter 12. And the Lord said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country. And again here we have the word le'ek lehom. Don't go and look to the outer appearances. Go within to see what it's saying inside you. So when we come across the word Hebrew that we see right here, first place it's used is in 14. It's not used again until later at the end of this book. And we begin to realize that this word Eber, let me just spell it for you. In Hebrew, Beth Rash, I believe is how it's spelled. Yeah. Beth, Rash, Yod. Now that's the word that's translated Hebrew. The word, this is called, in Hebrew, this is called ayin, A-Y-I-N, and it actually means the eye of God. And then this word is called Beth in Hebrew, Beth or Ba'ith. We call it B-E-T-H, that's just how we call it. And it means container, or house. In other words, you are the container, you are the house of God. This word, this glip, rash, R-A-Y-S-H, it means fire. It's the fire principle of God. And then this little glip is the smallest glip in the Hebrew. It's called the Yod or Yud. And it has to do with the 10. It means spirit and matter. Now, if you take all of that and you begin to look at this, and this is how I define any Hebrew word. It's not complicated, it's real simple. You understand each glip and know what that glip means, and then you find out what that glip means, and you begin to look at this. This is the word Eber in Hebrew. We call it Hebrew. But here's what it's talking about. It's talking about the eye of God in the house of God, which is the container that is filled with the fire of God, both in spirit and matter. My God, that just about made my feet dance. You know who that is? That's you! I mean, shoot! And that's a Hebrew. This is Hebrew. And so when we talk about the Hebrew text, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about a book that is about how God sees. God sees through His eyes, just like you. But God's eyes are in you. In all Eastern terminology, it was considered your third eye or your pineal gland. And the pineal gland is a very, very important place in your being. And many of I think the American Food Association, American Medical Association, and all of that knows these truths, doing everything they can to both kill you and me and dumb us down. They want to harden your pineal gland, calcify it, and they do it through all of the crap they give us to drink. Especially sodas and soft drinks and all the other stuff that they give us to drink. And the whole purpose behind it is calcify the pineal gland, you know, so that you can't let God see. We've blurred the vision of God. So we have to understand Abraham was not from the Hebrew people. He was from the light of knowledge. This character is from that. You see, you got to realize the knowledge that you contain is within you. It's not from books and learning that you've got. Oh my goodness, I wish I had this quote. Man, oh man, I don't have it. I'll bring it next week and I'll read it. I'll read a part of it to you. It was from the chief of the Indian tribes that represented all of South America. You want to take a picture of that?
Yeah, I didn't bring my phone in.
It's the chief. When right before the Civil War, when they were gathering the Indians up and telling them, they called the president, they called him the Great White Chief. They were trained to call him that. And they were trying to convince them to surrender their lands. I mean, you got to realize all this belonged to the American Indian. We come in here. I mean, Chief Van House over here. Go over and look at the beauty of the structure of that. That wasn't built by Americans. That was built by Indians. I mean, it has a staircase in it that they go over. The engineers go over there and scratch their heads. How did they do that? Well, it's just savages, you know. I mean, they dumb us down to make us think these people, all they're going to do is just eat raw rabbit and kill each other. And it's just gross error. But this chief, he wrote a letter, and I tell you, this is the most profound letter I have ever read. And it's written to the President of the United States back in the late 1840s to tell the President that they understand what the President's trying to do by buying their land from them. And he writes in this letter, he says, he understood that nobody could buy the air that you breathe, it belonged to God. That nobody could buy the sky that we look at both day and night, that it belonged to God. And he found it very hard to understand how anybody can buy and sell the earth because it belonged to God. So he struggled with how to convince his people that they needed to sell their land that God owned, and the government was going to give them a good land out there somewhere in the middle, in the West. I mean, it's the most profound letter you've ever heard or read, and to try to make us think that these people were savages. No, to read the wisdom that comes. And this man had never read a book in his life. Where did that wisdom come? It comes from within, the deposit of God that's in his being, the same deposit that you and I have. So it's not based on how many books you've read. It's not based on how much knowledge you have attained out here. It's based off this deposit right here of what's inside you, what's inside me. That's where it's at. That's what we need to draw back on. So when we understand this Heber, we begin to understand ourselves better. Okay, now I'll go real quickly with me. I'm going over to Genesis 32, and I'm going to just close on this note over here in Genesis 32. My goodness. Y'all get me all tore up here. I want to read you something here. I mean, we've all been religionized out the hills. It's terrible what's happened to us. This is from Alvin Boyd Kuhn, Rebirth for Christianity. He says religions are basically mankind's efforts to relate the content of human consciousness in both feeling and thought to the life in the world. Now he's being real sweet right here. He normally is not that nice to them. But he's saying it's their efforts to try to do this. They don't do a good job of it. He says because he's trying to give it two different things, feelings and thought. And feelings and thought. Let me show you what I do right here. Feelings and thought. Spirit and matter. Spirit is based in thinking. As a man thinketh, he is. Why? It's a spiritual principle. You think you're a piece of crap, you act and you live like that. That's fine. That's how you think. If you think that you are as God is, guess what? You begin to pull yourself up to that. Nobody else does that to you. If you think like that, it automatically pulls you up. As a man thinketh, so is he. Proverbs. Feelings over here. One of the most powerful things we've got, because we move by it. We are swayed by it. Well, I just feel bad today. And as long as you let yourself feel that way, you'll pull the covers up and lay back down. Or if you begin to realize they are susceptible to change. Those things that feel bad can feel good. Right? Amen. Physical and psychic. Feelings and thought. What the senses experience, what the emotions feel, what the intellect cognates in response to living must precipitate in consciousness a sentiment of integrated psychic elements. Whether the individual knows its objective or not, this deposit is his religion. So that religion will be based off your sensual experience or your emotional feeling. Isn't that how religion gets you? They can do it to all of us. If we'd done it this morning, right now, we're just a little bit late. Should have done it about 12 or 5 to 12. We should have had the pianist come to the piano. And while all of y'all bowing your heads, and she's playing Just As I Am, and you're seeing the fires of hell just burn higher and higher and higher, and you know sure as hell you don't want to go there. and then we start singing, and the preacher says, now just gentle and softly, kneel at the cross, I will meet you there.
Come while he waits for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Jamie can do it. She sat through it her whole life. Raised her kids in it. We all did. What are they appealing to? Your feeling. That's the only thing they're trying to appeal to. They're not appealing to your intellect. If they did, you'd get up and run. You'd say, what the hell am I doing in here? Let me read this to you. It says, the ancient sages, drawing upon the living mythos of their world and other ages, which Plotinus called the world's soul, formulated an organic integration of the principles governing the play of the living energies. This synthesis of knowledge was treasured as the priceless heritage of mankind from the gods. From time to time, there arose societies, associations, and/or brotherhoods which aimed to preserve and to cultivate and to practice the principles and techniques of this archaic science. What happened? 1,800 years ago, religion happened. It happened to all of us. And then it began to pull us further and further away from this archaic science. And now we don't understand this science. I talk about this and it seems like I'm talking gibberish. It's a language we've lost. That's what he's saying. But it was the true language of all cultures, all nations, and all peoples. And under that kind of knowledge, the earth reigned supreme in peace and abundance. And should today. Let me read you the notes that I wrote down. Religion offers sensual experience. I would just love to shout this. Religion offers you sensual experience, which is a seemingly very real experience. You can have a sensual experience, and to you, that experience is as real as anything that ever was. But it's sensual. What do I mean by that? I mean, it's based off of the outward emotions. That's what it is. And it's very emotional. Or you can get a spiritual experience that's eternal, that will take you into deeper and deeper knowledge of God, that will open your mind to all possibilities. Both are experiences. I don't discount either. Religion offers sensual experience, which most of the time is based in a lie and totally ignores the truth. It seems contrary to the lie. And that's just true. That's how it is. If the truth is contrary to what they have believed to be the truth, which is a lie, ain't no way. They won't go there. Is spiritual truth offers the motif or the idea that most esoteric teachings offered the concept of a dying and resurrecting. In other words, a dying just simply means spiritual life has poured itself in flesh in order that it would experience awakening or resurrection. So the concept of a dying and a resurrecting God-man in all of the stories, whether the story was Osiris, or the story was about Krishna, or the story was about Buddha, which were all known to be mythical characters. None of them were real. None of them lived in physical bodies. They were just characters in a story. And or Jesus. All the stories are the same. If you go back and study the story of Osiris, at the age of 30, he went in ministry. He had 12 disciples. He came and lived and died for the betterment of humanity. That's the story of Osiris. Thousands of years before the story of Jesus. Then if you study the story of Krishna, Same exact story. Then if you study the story of Buddha, same story. Then if you study the story of Jesus, same story. Is that coincidence? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not saying yea or nay. Yet Christianity closed its mind to its most credible asset, which was its ability to think. And we do the same thing. We sometimes wind up finding ourselves committing the same error from our lack of an ability to just think. So I'm just gonna quit right here and unhook. I really was going to go back to Genesis chapter 32 because I wanted to show you the story of the Hebrew is this story right here of the Eber. That's the Hebrew word Eber, got translated Hebrew, which is actually, it's a picture of you. This is who you are. And I want to show you, and we'll just pick it up next week, I wanted to show you the story of Israel. Because this is Israel. Right here, the stick man is Israel. You are Israel. It was never meant to be a nation. It was made into a nation around 700 BC. Somewhere around 700-800 BC. That's when religion began to take hold of these phenomenal teachings and began to take these teachings and twist them to make that which was an allegory, a drama, a great story, they begin to twist them and try to make them historical characters. Prior to that, they were never historical characters. They were always principles in a story. And when we learn the principles that are in the stories, the principle becomes the truth, and it's truth that anybody can live by, and everybody can live by. And it will change and transform and do all of the wonderful things that it does to us. Okay?
What did you say that word was at the top?
Eber. Eber. Ayin, Beth. See, you can hear it. Eber. Ayin. E. Ayin this is 70 in Hebrew. This is 7. This is 7 with the line down the middle of it to make it double. That's what this 7-0 means, duality. So this is the eye of God in duality. Beth, Rash, Yod. Eber. See?
I just couldn't remember what the first.
Yeah, that's the ayin. That's number 70. And that's Beth, that's number 2. That's what the Hebrew Bible starts out with. The first glip in the Hebrew Bible is the Beth, which is the container, which is what it should be. That's why I said the first word in Hebrew in Genesis 1:1, Barashit, means at your birthing. So that's what it's about.
Number 2 for some reason. I don't know why I thought that was the second one.
Yeah. That's the Beth. The Rash, this is 200. So you have a 2, and then 200, it goes from 2 is duality, and it takes duality back into Trinity. That's 200. Just like the Hebrews, when they took and borrowed from the Egyptians natura, that was their word for God. They had no word for God. They called it the natura. They actually were referring to the mind or the thought or the intelligence behind all nature. Because they understood that there was something much, much higher than man could even conceive, because man couldn't conceive it, so he had nothing to call it. So in some schools, in some mythologies, they call it nothing. Or no dash thing. Why? Because it actually was everything. But what are you going to call everything? So there was no word for God. So they called it the natura. And actually that just simply meant the intelligence or the mind that created all nature, including humanity. So now then we have a German word. That's a German word. That's where that comes from, God. That is not a Bible word. It didn't exist in the Bible. Now, you can go into the Greek Bible or you can go into a Hebrew Bible and you will not find that word, God. It just ain't there. But we have such a confusion about this word God because religion made it to be your great-grandfather in the sky. Long white hair, long white beard. But bless God, he can still handle you. You know what I'm saying? That's what religion done for us. They took that word and made it into a personality and called it God. The mind of German did that. Prior to that, it wasn't. It wasn't. So, okay? That clear? Oh.